Welcome. It's Dr. Pat and talking about treasury bills. Treasury bills are those things that governments use to or to get money, to raise money. And one of the things going on is it's about the length of time that it's used for. So treasury bills are ones used within a year, and treasury bonds are those that last longer than a year. Okay, so that's the main difference between a bond and a bill. And so because of that time frame, T-bills, treasury bills, use simple interest. Whereas treasury bonds, that's a compounding interest because of the length of time. Once you get more beyond a year's time in investment, we're analyzing it in terms of compound interest. Okay, so in today's, we're going to be talking about T-bills, simple interest, short periods of time that they're used for. Okay, but before we get into an example of it, what I'd like to do is let's get back to that frame of mind, that background of working with, calculating with percents, okay? And so here's what I've got is this $90 and $100, okay? A little bit of flow of time. It depends on which direction, who you're starting with. If we're starting with 90 and then ending up with 100, that's going to be different than starting with 100 and then ending up with 90 in terms of the percentages. So we know the difference between these two numbers is $10. Okay, so in terms of the $100, this difference of $10, what percentage of it, of starting with 100 is $10, and it's 10%, okay? So I take that $10 divided by 100, and that's how I'm getting my 10%. So to go from 100 to 90 is a 10% change. It's a decrease, so it's negative, but it's a 10% change is what I want to make the point. Now, if I start with the 90 and change to 100. If I gain $10 and I'm starting with 90, that's a different percentage change because it's more than 10%. The reason being is because 10% of 90 is only 9. And if I added 9 to 90, I'm only at 99. So the percent increase, it's got to be more. It's 11.111 continuing on. And so what I'm trying to say is if we start with 90 and look at a 10% increase, we get a different perspective, a different percent as if we started with 100 and went to 90 with a $10 decrease difference there, and that would be only 10%. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is if our beginning and ending makes a big difference for us when we're calculating percentages. And so that's what I want to bring that key point. It's the number we start with matters for percents. That's what I just want to try and bring your attention to. Okay, now how does that apply to T-bills to a business situation? Well, when you're calculating, your percentages, because that's what we do in business, is we're going to calculate percentages to see how good of an investment is, because it's all based upon percentages. That's how we analyze things. So if I'm starting with 90 as my starting value, and then I'm going to end up with 100, because hopefully my investments go up, so then what I'm looking for is normally what we call a yield. Based upon what you're investing, what percentage increase did you get? Did you get a return of? And so starting with 90, and if I ended up with $100 in my investment, then I had an 11.1% increase, that kind of return. And if it happened for the year, that would be my annual yield. So that's where we're going with the yield, is kind of the idea based upon what we're starting with, what we're investing. And here's your simple interest formula that represents that idea. Okay, and inside this parentheses, this is basically figuring out how much interest you earn, adding it onto the previous balance, and putting it all together to figure out your future value, your ending balance. And so what I got going on here is this percentage, this parentheses is being multiplied to the PV, to the present value in the timeline, the beginning amount that we have in investments. So when we're talking about using the yield as what we're looking for, the rate of return, then we have a formula that is set up that's multiplying our investment. But now if we actually go over here to the other side and say, hey, 100 is my starting value, then what we're looking at is we're looking at what they call a discounted situation in terms of our T-bills. Okay, we're starting with this ending amount, and we're going to work backwards to figure out how much interest, our rate of return. And when we do that, our calculations, our formula, notice this parentheses thing, well, it's got a minus sign that we'll talk about that in a second, but the parentheses thing is now multiplied to the future value, the ending amount, because that's what we want to do, is we want to multiply it to the 100, whereas in the previous example, PV is the investment amount, and that's what we multiplied. So between the regular yield focused perspective and a discounted perspective, it's all about who the rate is multiplying to. Who are we using to do our calculations for our percentages? Okay, and so that is the key point here that we're having. Now this is a minus sign here, is in order to go from 100 back down to a 90, you got to subtract. So we're subtracting that $10, okay? Whereas when you're looking at, this is what I'm starting with, how much do I gain to get to 100, then we're adding, okay, because we're adding to our investments. So this is about adding the interest to get to the ending amount. A discounted idea is about starting with what we end, and then we're working backwards, we're subtracting to get what we should have for our beginning amount. Okay, so that's our discounted kind of thing. All right, so now in terms of bills and bonds, this $100 is called the face value. This is what is written on your documents, okay? So that's on the coupon. So this is called the face value. It's the ending amount. That's the promise. The promise to pay $100 is what the promise is for that T-bill and bond. Okay, so that's the beginning, and I just really want to make a big emphasis because it's so important, because these things are so confusing, because there's the nuances here is crazy, but it's about money, so you definitely want to be on top of it. It's who do we start with to do our calculation. That's one of the key things you're going to need to figure out. Okay, so that's the beginning. I'm going to do a couple examples. I'll do one example using the yield perspective, starting with what I want to invest, and then we'll do a discounted T-bill, and that's focused on the face value. Okay, thanks, and talk to you later.